Hi, everybody. Hopefully people are starting to trickle back after a break. We're about to start what I think is one of the most important parts of this workshop, which is discussing the answers to those questions we brought up before, and as well as any other questions that have come up. We've noted that, there are some things people brought up that they wanted to discuss but haven't had the time yet. So that's part of the reason why, in addition to the breakout rooms, we also added extra time after that to like a big room discussion in case we didn't cover anything. I'll share my screen now. So yeah, so I just hopefully people are coming back and we'll be able to see this. And I'm not sure how many people we'll have. We're trying to plan for the breakout rooms to be appropriate sizes, but it also depends on how many people are here for it. But anyway, okay, so I'll just go through some quick instructions for this discussion phase. Okay, so you'll be randomly assigned to one of 8 or maybe fewer breakout rooms on Zoom. So all you have to do is sort of sit there on Zoom, and Joey will be moving people into breakout rooms. You shouldn't need to do anything. And then you'll be discussing 3 main questions that we've brought up each day. Basically, do we understand why the fire emissions data sets are so different from one another? I certainly have learned a lot and feel like, yes, there's a lot of reasons. And then is there any information still missing in that for that question? And then we're discussing the fire emissions recommendations for the HTAP fire study. Has any one fire emission stood out as the best or most appropriate for a common input? Is there anyone available to combine the emissions data sets in a meaningful way for like a best one for all regions and species? And how can we quickly arrive at a good data set? Because as we mentioned, Terry mentioned, the model simulations would start early in 2024, around spring 2024. And then the third question was, is there a consensus on the MODIS to VIIRS transition for the future of fire emissions data sets? And then we will leave it open. So if each breakout group would like to discuss and bring up other important questions, please do. So the breakout rooms won't be recorded, but each room will have its own Jamboard for all participants to be able to add the notes with their thoughts. So there's like a page, this is just a screenshot from a Jamboard. There's 3 pages with the 3 questions and their sub-questions. And then on the lower left arrow here, it points to where you would you would click to add a sticky note with your thoughts. You can add as many sticky notes as you want. And in this way, and then if you have any technical problems though, each room will have a leader helping. And then the upper right arrow here is just showing where you would flip through the pages to answer the different questions. So yeah, so there's a page in the Jamboard for each question, and then additional blank pages in the Jamboard for additional topics. And then each breakout room will have 1 to 2 members of either the burned team or the HTAP team to help lead. And they will provide the Jamboard link in the Zoom chat once everyone's in the breakout room. Yeah, I think that's it for the instructions. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. And I see about 38 people here. I don't know if it's because people are slowly trickling back, but it also might take a few minutes for Joey to help get us all into the breakout rooms. Yeah. So are there any questions or concerns about the discussion phase? Okay, if not, maybe just bear with us for a few minutes as Joey helps organize us all into rooms. We're hoping the rooms will be at least 8 people each for a good discussion. And yeah, it might take a few minutes. Oh, and then I should say, like the discussion phase in the breakout rooms is about an hour, maybe a little more, and then we come back to the main room so where we can all discuss together as well.
Cindy, if we have a minute while we get organized,
Yeah.
the HTAP experiments that are central to these questions, are these scoped yet? Do we understand things like the time frame, the spatial resolution, what's being planned for those experiments?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the scope is pretty big. We have a lot of different like modelers interested. So, and they range from like air quality modeling, toxics modeling, Earth system modeling, you know, with the short-lived climate forcer aspect. So there's going to be a big range of models, including resolutions and stuff like that. And the group also has a wide range of interest in terms of like regional focus and stuff like that. But generally, it's going to be global modeling for the most part, although some regional modeling maybe as well. Honestly, it's kind of still being scoped, and it's a large scope because it depends on who's interested to participate and what their interests are. So we mentioned the white paper still being written this year. We're aiming to kind of finalize that white paper by end of December. Although, like Terry said, it's kind of still going to be a working document for the community. Yeah, so I'm kind of losing track of your question. So yeah, the other thing was, as they mentioned, could pick more than one fire emissions data set, but when we do, that's going to multiply how many model experiments get done, because there's already going to be, we're already talking about perturbing those emissions, you know, like if you scale down fire from one region, what's the impact on the other region? So there's already kind of a regional breakup of the perturbation experiments. So then if there's also an emissions inventory options, that's going to really grow the number of experiments. We're also talking about fire process perturbation experiments like plume height. So if everybody uses the same plume height parameterization versus their own, how does that impact results? So it's kind of like you're going to blow up the number of experiments if we end up deciding that we need to use more than one fire emissions data set. And so that's kind of why I'm interested if the discussions kind of converge on a data set, or if someone happens to volunteer to create some sort of ensemble of the fire emissions, or mosaic as we're calling it.
No, this really helps. One additional scoping question is the scope. Does it have goals of general atmospheric chemistry, or is it strictly criteria pollutants, air toxics? Or is it just criteria pollutants?
Yeah,
or is
so
it just PM?
you know, yeah, we call it a multi-pollutant study because we want to cover SLCFs, criteria pollutants, POPs, mercury. It's kind of like how it was kind of like designed to focus on fire, because fire really covers off that whole spectrum. Basically everything except like long-term greenhouse gases like CO2 and I guess nitrous oxide, but everything else. So yeah, we're trying to cover all the pollutants, which is why again, I think it would be ideal if it was one base set of fire emissions that all models use, just to just to not complicate things.
Okay, that's really good and helpful to know. I just have to do one more because I see that Guido is very attentive here. And if we have 1 minute, I really want to get back to the question that I had for Guido after his presentation. Now that we've seen all of the talks the last 2 days, which is when as you progress towards smaller and smaller fires, you get into some muddy areas of definition. You get into some questions about is that really part of my open biomass burning source, or is that better characterized as a biofuel source or something else? And I just wanted to just revisit that question really quickly and see if Guido had any thoughts about the new GFED 5 and how it has pushed towards those definitional limits.
I guess the smallest fires we now include are the ones in agriculture areas that you map with planets. So that's the work from Joanne Hall. And that probably doesn't include like garbage burning, those kind of things. And also because it's still based on modus, like the really small household fires, they won't be included in our data. I'm not sure if you know their efforts. I mean, we had some of the older data sets that included those. If they are included, for example, in HTAP, I think for like yeah, as long as you can map it, or as long as it's detecting a thermal signal from modus, as long as you can map it with like Sentinel-2 kind of data, then we hope it's included. So everything smaller won't be included. So of course that sort of, it's still transient, right? We include now more than we used to, but we're not going to include everything. And I think most of the garbage burning, those kind of things, that's still not included. Not sure if that's really helpful, but
I think that is helpful. I think that tells us that you're confident that the fires that you're observing are still within, are still well bounded within the definition of open biomass burning. So, the smaller stuff that's missed may be a mix of different types, but the stuff that you do include, you have a good amount of confidence that meets the definition of the open biomass burning.
Yeah, I think so. It probably it may be changing as soon as you start to include fears, right? Then you may detect some of the larger campfires, those kind of things. But I mean, for the future, we're going to scale what we have based on the modus record with fear. So there may be some issues, but yeah, I think that's becoming a new territory. One question for the HTAP I had. What kind of spatial resolution are you guys looking for?
Yeah, it's pretty variable. Some air quality models have pretty high spatial resolution. Then some ESMs, like my own, is quite coarse. But maybe Tim or Terry have a feel for what HTAP needs in terms of resolution.
Resolution of emissions. Well, when the resolution of the global models will be something like between 1 and 2 degrees. So the coarser ones will be more like 2, the finer ones will be more like 1. Some of them might go higher, but probably not too many. They'll probably be more model is interested as well, and then they get down to maybe 0.25 or 0.1 degree. That's the ballpark sort of figure there, I think.
I'm asking also because I mean, like FIM is 1 kilometer, and then GFED is 0.1 degree, GFED is 0.25. So that's also a little bit relevant, I think. If you really look for the high resolution models, and then some of them won't be suitable. So.
Our anthropogenic emissions, I think, will be available at 0.1 degree. So we probably wouldn't be looking for anything more higher resolution than that. But we'd probably be willing to take things that are of less resolution.
Okay, so I think Joey's ready to move us into the rooms. And there, like I said, there'll be someone from either HTAB or Burned in each room. So more of these clarifying questions can also be discussed there. Yeah, so Joey, whenever you're ready. Welcome back, everybody. Yeah, thank you, everybody. I know, well, thank you, people in my group. We had a great discussion. I hope everyone else's was really good too. Yeah, lots of great ideas in our Jamboard. So we kind of discussed last minute that we'd wanted more time with all of us here in the big room. But then I don't know if we planned exactly how this would go. Maybe we can have a representative from each room start, and then it will help seed some conversation here. Okay, I see Nancy nodding. So should I go first? I didn't get key takeaways, but
Cindy, can you just, we had 4 rooms, is that correct? And who was leading each room? It was myself, you, and Tim. Did you have a room? Okay. And there must have been one other.
oh,
Terry. Okay. There we go. Thank you. I think that's who we had. So yeah, I think that's a good idea, Cindy. It got a little crazy. I can do something. It wasn't that crazy.
Yeah, so did any of you want to start? I mean, we could each share our screen or one at a time.
Why don't you go ahead, Cindy, and show us what to do?
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I can share the screen with the Jamboard. So this was our breakout room. We had a lot of ideas about what information is still missing. We all agreed that thanks to the presentations in the workshop, we definitely have a better understanding of why the fire emissions data sets are so different from one another. And if anything, it would be disconcerting if they were close together, given how different the methodologies are. So we have a lot of little sticky notes with the thoughts about, oh yeah, this is why they're so different from one another. And there was a bit of discussion about how it's not a bad thing necessarily. It's actually kind of good to have different, like, unique fire emissions data sets. But then, yeah, missing information. We have a few kind of notes that more field campaigns, on the ground, because there's not much ground truth out there to compare the fire emissions to. So more field campaigns. And then what would be nice, like this is like kind of a dream, but to have all those field campaigns kind of in one centralized place so that the global community could have access to those data, ideally in the same format. Anyway, but then, yeah, someone mentioned that Gaia is creating an emissions database with the same format. That's maybe more related to all the different fire missions could go in there in the same format. But then, yeah, having something for the observations from the field campaigns. Yeah, so there's a bunch of other notes. Oh, and the peat kind of came up when we were discussing another question, but we kind of came back here because in terms of missing information, the peat maps are kind of out of date and uncertain. And then having more measurements of peat fires would be, in several regions, would be useful. Because I think in one of the data sets, emission factors for peat were the same, whether they're for tropical peat or high latitude peat, and like we don't really know if they should be. Yeah, so there's definitely a better understanding of why they're different, but obviously still more information could be very helpful. And then for the second question, our group was saying, no, there's no one fire emissions data set that stood out as best or most appropriate, but that perhaps an ensemble mean or median, like median would be better, of the fire emissions would be easier, like more likely to be created, because it would be a lot more work and maybe next to impossible to actually create a mosaic of the best for all regions and all species. And that seems very daunting. I don't know if anyone, like no one in our group volunteered to do that. So we were talking about like an ensemble median of the fire emissions would be great. And maybe possible. Of course, that raises other questions in how to do that. And then we thought like whichever emissions get used, having the realistic diurnal cycle of fires seemed important. And whichever one gets used, having peat included seemed important, like particularly from Tina's presentation today. And then there's some concern about a couple of concerns here about GFED 4 and GFED 5. And then the last one, we were wondering, and we weren't totally sure in our group, if VEERS has a burned area product, because that would obviously be an important question for the MODIS to VEERS transition for GFED anyway, maybe, and for others. I think a lot of them are kind of calibrated to that. And then how like Finn is sort of has a MODIS and VEERS version and a MODIS only version, and then they're working on a VEERS only version, and all of that will be helpful information while they're all overlapping. Yeah, and we think that there's several other points that people can read, but more satellites, more people, more funding is always is what we all want and need. Okay, that's I think the summary from us.
I'm happy to go next, but before I do that, the question of VEERS burn area product, I don't believe so. But Guido, maybe you can answer that better though.
It's a matter of funding, I think.
Yeah.
No, GD is working on it, but there's as far as I know, there's no product yet.
Yeah, there is no intention to make a so-called standard data product right now. That's called global burn area. And Lewis has been working on it and been trying to find funding to do that, but it's not going to be a standard product out of the NOAA system, is my understanding. I don't know if anybody else on here can elaborate. Okay, that does make things a little different, and I'm sure Guido's up at night all the time because of the loss of MODIS.
I don't sleep anymore.
All right, I will share what we had in our breakout, some of the same thoughts. Go back to page 1 here. So I think people all agreed that each of us learned something that we may have come to the meeting knowing quite a bit about one or two parts of it, but certainly learned quite a bit. And so pulling it all together was very helpful. So that's kind of, did we learn anything new and how they're different from each other? And the answer is we got two different answers. Yes, they're different from each other, but they're actually not that different from each other in some cases. So it depends on where you are and what you're looking at. Do we need more information, and what information is still missing? We spent a little bit of time on that. This cluster over here basically names everything that has missing information, but I think the consensus was related to fuel load for what's on the ground, the consumption, the combustion completeness, as a major factor for, especially for some regions with heavy fuels. And that, of course, is important field work that needs to be done. Then I ended up writing Maine outcome and misspelling Maine. For this one, one thing that was unclear between all of us in the room was what has been done when it comes to sensitivity analysis, uncertainty assessment. And I think what could be helpful, and I know some of that because of what I've done in the past, and others know other parts of it. And we had some presentations at this conference, at this workshop. But I think there's not a common language that has pulled this together and I think that's part of what we'll be doing for this report, but I think there can be a lot more of that too. There's been work over the years looking at uncertainties and where the uncertainties come from within the standard approach, but most of that has been presented in a very discipline-centric way. So efforts that are done within the atmospheric science community don't trickle into the fire science community and vice versa. And I think there's a lot to learn there. The second question related to the multi-model, multi-species fire study that HTAP is working on. Did any of them stand out? I don't think we answered that directly. We spent a lot of time discussing this idea of blending or having a mosaic idea. A regional approach could be made, but then that becomes highly problematic when you're looking at a global question and answer. But one thing I noted, at least within the presentations that were made, is that in some cases, in some regions, some of the models do very well and some do not do very well. And it varies by region. So the question is whether a regional approach could be put forth. So really the intercomparison, I thought what we had at this workshop is probably the best information that's been put out there, and capturing that is going to be very helpful for the community to make sure we can understand how to move forward on this question. And then the final page, we started losing a little bit of steam. But again, the question of transitioning away from MODIS, there's a comment about geostationary, but then that becomes a problem in parts of the world where those systems are not available, like northern latitudes and such. Carrie was with us and working on the Canadian approach, which they are starting in an era where MODIS is not being relied upon. So they're again looking for a burn area approach, but they're using VIIRS as their primary data source, so that's good. There's also was a comment about higher resolution products, some work being done using Landsat and Sentinel-2 to make burn area maps that possibly could be downscaled, and with the idea of a Landsat Next, which is to be a more complete system for mapping the Earth. There may be opportunities there, but that's in the future. So I think that I'll leave it at that. It's certainly, we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, and maybe we move it to either Tim or Tim, why don't you go next?
Sure. Then let me share my screen. Okay. So you should be able to see that now, right? Okay. Let me go back to page 1. So yeah, we had a great discussion in the breakout group. So on the question of, do we understand why the fire emissions data sets are so different? There were several different things which were gone through there. So there was, of course, the idea of identifying fires at all, in particular small fires. There was then the question of ecosystem type and what that means for the fuel loading and how much fuel has been consumed, burned, and so on. Then that also moved into a discussion on emission factors. They drive some of the differences, and that there's still missing information on emission factors. So, for example, dynamic emission factors and understanding how they vary over time was perhaps also something missing there. So we could sort of broadly classify these different pieces of information into these kind of three blobs here. And then there was sort of some more general comments there about the stochastic and nonlinear nature of fire emissions just being challenging in general, and that there's different approaches which give us different information, and that it's interesting to do comparisons, and that it might be valuable to compare inventories that have consistent approaches for some of their input values. So that was also getting to the issue of comparing different inventories as well. Then we also had quite a lot to say about the HTAP multi-model study. So there was some data sets named. So there was some general positivity on the GFED data set there, but Fin was also mentioned there as well. But top-down approaches might be better constrained. But then we want to be careful there as well, because AOD, for example, has more issues. Then there was the discussion of choosing maybe two inventories, one that's high, one that's low, and then the issue of doing a mosaic inventory. This was also an idea. This has also been discussed. And then the idea of doing an ensemble, maybe using some multiple kind of, some larger sets of inventories rather than just one. And then there's the issue, of course, with how that fits into the structure of planning the HTAP work, is that we plan to do a large set of regional perturbation runs using one inventory. If we start to use more inventories than that, then that just blows up the size of the number of model runs that people need to do. But potentially we could think about doing a set of base runs, so without perturbations, just with doing several different emission inventories and comparing them in their base runs without doing perturbations. If there was interest in that from the community, then we could maybe do that. And if we wanted to do that, then it might be a good idea to come up with modified versions of the different inventories that standardize on some of their inputs. For example, using a standard set of emission factors, continuing to use their own detection and burnt area and everything. Do that, but standardizing on a set of emission factors to make the comparison easier. And then there was some discussion about comparing secondary species because model chemistry is different. Aerosol sink terms, for example. The idea maybe to relate differences in secondary species to differences in CO, because the CO sink term is much more simple in models than the sink term for all of these other secondary species. So that maybe that could be an approach to comparing different model runs with different inventories. There was the issue of then standardizing further on things like plume rise, but with the difficulty that depends on the meteorology, which could be very model dependent. Regarding the modus to viz transition, we had a little bit less to say about that. It sort of ranged from just still being worried and thinking about how much left there is to do. Yes, people are thinking about it, but it will be difficult. There's some impressive work being done though, and there are some specific things where people have already identified Viz is doing well. So there's the summary of our session. I'll stop.
Thanks, Tim. And then Terry.
Yep. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm not going to show you the Jamboard because we had first of all, we had a lot of conversation that's very similar to many of the conversations in the other groups. But also we ended up, I took more notes offline than adding a lot of sticky notes to the boards. So a couple of things. So first, on the first question about do we understand the differences, we had a really good conversation about the fact that there are interdependencies between the various inventory products. So sometimes it's hard they're not completely independent for some of the products, and so understanding those interdependencies makes that very confusing. But I think that the most constructive thing that coming out of this was that it would be really useful to produce a table that is inventory product by region, and then have a discussion on the strengths and weaknesses and performance of each inventory product in each region. What are the concerns? What does this do well? What's it missing? Things like that, so that you can kind of begin to look at that and begin to understand where the strengths and weaknesses of those are, and that if we're really going to do to get at the heart of the differences in the different inventory products, we need to design sort of a fire emissions modeling MIP, and really structure something so that we can be comparing apples to apples across the different ones. Because even talking about emission factors, using the term slightly differently in some cases. So that was question 1. On question 2, what to do for HTAP, there was sort of concerns about how you might develop a mosaic or an ensemble average or something like that because of the differences. But to me, the most interesting thing that came up is we're sort of looking to GFED5 and FIN 2.5 as sort of presumptive defaults, and we know that the burned area is much higher, and some of the emissions are go up. And one thing that we're hearing a lot of the comparisons based on AOD and based on CO, but what about the reactive species like NOx, and what's it going to do to the ozone impacts? And from an HTAP perspective, that's going to be really important, because PM is really important to the fire impact overall and to health and climate and things like that. But from a policy perspective, ozone is a pretty critical issue, and that's going to come back to have an impact on the other parts of the HTAP portfolio. So looking at some of the reactive species is really important. On question 3 on the transition, we know that VIIRS sees smaller fires, but do we really understand the characteristics of the fire activity that VIIRS is picking up that wasn't in MODIS? I'm not sure that we weren't clear that we understood that. We also weren't clear, what are we losing in VIIRS that what are we not seeing that we saw in MODIS and that picture. So we think there needs to be a lot more work while we still can. And we did spend a fair bit of time on our 4th page, which was other issues that we might talk about. And so one of these was talking about things that came up in other groups, was the issue of the importance of chemistry and how emission factors are being determined from observations and potentially observations of aged plumes, and how we separate that out. I saw on one of the other boards, someone characterized this as what's time zero for emission factors, and it becomes this interesting question of what do you count as an emission, and what gets treated by the chemistry in the model, and how you do that, and that might be different for different models. We spent a fair bit of time talking about the importance of plume injection and whether you're above the boundary layer in the free troposphere, and the importance of that for various impacts, and getting that correct, and probably the need to work with regional scale models that have higher resolution and are more able to capture that boundary layer free troposphere exchange that may not be correct or maybe more simplified in coarser resolution global models. Those were the main things that that I thought that we talked about that could be added. And I'm hoping other folks will chime in if there are other things you want to add.
This is sort of a chance where if the person you wanted to discuss with wasn't in your breakout session, you can bring it up to the whole group. And I mentioned, I think in my room, but not to everybody, that the Jamboard links will be open for people to continue to add to later if they think of something later today or tomorrow. I think, keep adding to it until next Tuesday, when we probably want to stop taking input then.
And for the folks in the room that I was in, I'm going to add some more notes to the Jamboard to capture what we kept separately.
And I'll just say, for the group that I was in, I think I've been meaning to group them a little bit better. So feel free to move the sticky notes around or edit them or add new ones to help organize the thoughts a little more.
Yeah, and I put in the chat, but I'll just say it out loud because I'm because it sounded like another group also talked about having a standard set of emission factors that all the emissions data sets would use, and then it would kind of, and then the NEVA emission factors seem like an obvious choice. Like, how, for the emissions developers, how difficult a task would that be? Is that possible to have like an alternate set of emissions that used a common set of emission factors? Is that even feasible?
Easy peasy.
I think the best way forward would be to provide a little bit of Python code that creates the different emission factors for you that you can do yourself then.
Okay, so it's not too difficult then.
I didn't quite understand that. Johannes, are you talking about comparing emission factors by extracting them, or are you talking about putting them back in?
If you want to use a different set of emission factors, you can give them to me and I'll give you a piece of Python code that will calculate emissions using those emission factors from dry matter, burnt, or whatever other field you have.
No, also in GFET, it's better. I mean, we come up with emissions per biome, and then it's just applying the emission factors. Except now for the savannas, we have something dynamic, but that wouldn't work here. Also, I just want to mention, Terry, I really liked, I mean, there's a fire MIP community, but that's really like a long term, but getting like a fire emission MIP or so, and really looking in this in a structured way, I mean, that would be great, I think. It's a good suggestion.
Cindy, what's next? I think we have about 10 minutes left. Is that right?
Yeah, so yeah, if there's no other burning discussion, I think we have just a short closing. Yeah, and I feel bad that it, like, because it's we have an optional day 4, so realistically, I know a lot of people won't come back. So it's kind of like the workshop closing, but it's also kind of not, because there is another day if people would like to come back. And then, yeah, in our closing slides, we have that. So Nancy, were you going to do the closing slide?
No, I'm not. That's why I think Mark said he may be able to. Or Mark, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here.
There you go.
Hard to talk, but yeah, I think I can very quickly just say, I think, thank you to everybody who's spoken. I think we had really excellent speakers, as we knew we would have, but the engagement has been fantastic. And I think just unfortunately I wasn't able to take part in the breakout sessions, but just looking through the boards, it looks really excellent. And I think everything we need to work with for the white paper or the document that we want to write, I think looks like it's there. And thanks, I know Nancy thanked Joey earlier, but yeah, the technical work was really essential to this, but also thanks to Cindy and Nancy for stepping in today. I mean, the technical side worked, the human side didn't work 100% for me and Rebecca, unfortunately. But yeah, I think I would like to say this workshop, like Guido said, we talked on and off on Twitter over the years. We should have another workshop like this. So great that we've had it, but it wouldn't have taken place without the support of Nancy and Rebecca, and especially Cindy, who really pulled in the HTAP guys and keeps us all on our toes and moving things along. So thank you very much to you guys too.
Yeah, thanks. Oops. Yeah, thank you everybody, and especially with the illnesses, people who stepped in to help is great. I think we're I have the I have the closing slides, but I didn't write them. So this slide has, I guess, some comments we heard. I think maybe Rebecca might have summarized them.
Yeah, Rebecca put this together. I added that red there because it came up.
Yeah, so definitely, like, kind of in addition to I think this sort of strikes me as, in addition to the fire emissions data sets, there's all these other things. And we are having another workshop next year. So some of that could be deferred and a focus for next year's workshop. So yeah, in terms of next steps, so the organizing committee will work up on summarizing those Jamboards more carefully in the meeting notes, and we can put together a more detailed draft outline for day 4, the optional day 4, which is Tuesday next week. So there's a little breathing room between now and then. And so we will email everybody the Jamboard links and the program for next Tuesday. And there's also going to be a post-workshop survey. So all that will get emailed to everybody. But yeah, while this coming Tuesday is going to be quite focused on the writing deliverables we kind of wanted from this workshop, it's also an opportunity to discuss things further that we maybe didn't have time for today. But generally speaking, next Tuesday, we want to not summarize the Jamboard and discussions, start focusing on the writing up of the emissions section of the HTAP white paper. I'll send around that link too when we email everybody. So writing that section, and then also we want to write a larger report, and then we can sort of assign writers to each section. We can maybe create an outline next Tuesday and then assign writing to that. And then for IGAC, we can write a newsletter article about this workshop too. So I think there's kind of 3 main writing deliverables: the newsletter, the HTAP white paper, and the larger kind of burned report that Mark was really spearheading the idea for. I think that's it. Anything else?
Well, I want to make sure that people know we're not done. We're helping with this HTAP effort right now. Burned as an organization, by the way, check out the really cool logo set that we have that people at NCAR helped develop. We that's what we did for the months before, and now we came up with a fantastic logo. And I think we put together a pretty good workshop, so I really appreciate it. We will be doing a in-person workshop. I think it's pretty likely, Cindy, that we're going to do that in conjunction with the IGAC meeting in Malaysia in September. So keep an eye out for that. It's probably going to be an add-on day before or after, something like that, or we're not sure yet. But it will be an in-person, possibly hybrid. We don't know that yet either. Look at the bigger question of uncertainty beyond just the needs of what HTAP needs. So it's going to really augment what we've been doing these last few days. I think that's all I have to say, Cindy. Good work.
Yeah, good work to everybody. Thanks so much for all the people who helped and presented and discussed. Yeah, thank you all.
Yeah, and thanks, Bernd. This has been great.
Well, thanks, HTAP. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
All right, take care, and I hope to see you on Tuesday next week. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you so much.